All right, and we are live. Welcome everyone back to Dynasty Mind. This is our first episode of 2018. This is my series of hoping to help people who wants to get involved in Dynasty and learning about developing a process. Tonight we have a wonderful guest, the legendary Matt Waldman, really a great guy that's all around, not just football, but when it comes to football, the the amount of information that Matt consumes and puts out there is massive. And Matt, you are quite the well-respected um, film evaluator, both for the analytics group as well as for the film group. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into doing this as a more than just a hobby. You take it to a different level.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris, and I thanks for having me on. It's a wonderful introduction. I don't know if I deserve half of that, but I can say this is that I got into this just because I was a big fan of football, and I grew up, playing it a lot, just in the backyards of our apartment complexes when I was growing up, and played it all the time until I finished high school. And at that point, you go to high school, you go to college, you trying to figure out what you want to do, and when I was working and finished school, I ended up in a fantasy league through my office.
Hmm.
And we were playing fantasy at that time before the internet really became as a commonplace thing, because it was around 1993, 1994 when we started playing. So the internet was available, but it
Mhm.
wasn't, it wasn't a type of thing that became the cultural phenomenon that it is now and the big business that it was. So, so we would keep score with newspaper and things like that, on Monday, and go to a local bar or a restaurant and watch Monday night game, knowing, okay, these are the players that we need to watch for tonight, to see if the scores are changed and everything. So that was exciting and fun. And it was a kind of an underground hobby. And I started writing for a site, FF Today, back in the early 2000s. I did a little bit of guest work because I had friends of mine who I worked with who said, they wrote for KFFL. They used to do like the Player Wire, news wire type of stuff for them, and they used to do some work here and there. And then someone told me about Football Guys, who I played in the league with, and I went on there, and I got hooked with those guys in terms of just watching their message board and some of the work that they were doing, because there was so much of it. And I ended up meeting someone in a league through an old childhood friend of mine who just asked me if I had any interest in writing, because we would negotiate trades a lot in this dynasty league that we were in. It was my first dynasty league,
Mhm.
and his name was Mike McGregor, and Mike McGregor is one of the co-owners at FF Today. He's probably the first person that came up with these draft dominator, draft buddy type of softwares that you draft with. He was the first one to do that. The type of website use where people do you input your league information and everything is catered towards what you do. He was one of the first people to adapt that for fantasy websites. And he was also the very first person to create a daily fantasy game
Oh,
called,
no.
yeah, he and I were kind of in a partnership for a little bit, but we just couldn't get it off the ground in a
Sure.
way that we needed to. But it's called Fantasy Throwdown. Um,
Mhm.
so um, so it was a one-on-one game that you could play, that you could, it was kind of a daily look at it.
Mhm.
So Mike's a fantastic resource, and he probably doesn't deserve enough. He deserves way more credit for a lot of things in this industry from a historical standpoint than most people would ever know. But he kind of gave me my opportunity to write at FF Today, and I was there for a few years. And so, that's kind of how all that started. And while I was doing writing for them, I thought, I really enjoyed dynasty leagues, and I really enjoyed the evaluation end of players,
Mhm.
and so that's kind of how the RSP kind of got off the ground, is that I just decided on a lark that I would do it. And I realized how much I loved doing it, and
Mhm.
saw an opportunity. And, now so that was around 2005, and I've been doing it full time now. So it's a crazy ride.
No, that was fantastic. I mean, listening to you, it feels like I was listening to a part of history. Fantasy football has a lot of different format, and people didn't know about all these things. Daily fantasy was around, but it wasn't as popular as it is today. I know that, but I didn't know you had all the way back to your FFT days. So it's wonderful. And I wish we had more time to kind of delve into that. Maybe something that I'll plan to do in the future to kind of go through with people their history with Dynasty. But we'll talk a little bit more about as we go through today's show, that we'll give you the opportunity to talk about how you come to your RSP, and that is something that I definitely want to touch on. But let's catch up on some of the current events. Super Bowl, it just happened this past Sunday. I felt like it's been an eternity ago. What has been your thoughts on the game and how the whole season kind of concluded?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really exciting season, and one of the things that I really enjoyed is we started to see the big media come to grips with the idea that the college game has infiltrated the NFL game. Even if it was wrongly applied, the number of times they talked about run pass options on plays. And, but still you're seeing teams spread things out more. I mean, you look at Tom Brady and they've been doing that for a while on New England's offense. But this year, think about it. You have Nick Foles and the wonderful story that he is. But when he was with Chip Kelly's offense in Philadelphia, which was a spread offense, he had that one fantastic season. And then, it didn't quite work out for him, long term. But then they returned to this, and you wouldn't have thought they would have returned to a spread offense when you bring in Carson Wentz, who was a West Coast offense quarterback at North Dakota State, but the rookie year kind of revealed some flaws with his footwork and accuracy off of that. And so they decided, maybe what we need to do with Wentz is let's spread the field out. Limit the number of times he has to actually drop back. He can just hop into position from the spread. We can do some play action fakes and some different motion to create some easier reads. It's not even so much that he doesn't read the field well. He reads the field very well. It's just we give him some easier opportunities to get into position to throw quickly, and as a result, put stress on the defense. And if they get pressure, we can allow him to run a little bit and to use his legs well. And the addition of everything else, I mean, it's simplifying it. There's so many other things, but that helped out a lot. And it made it easier for someone like Nick Foles to come to fruition. And you also saw things like development of players, Jared Goff developing and seeing that, what he needed was players around him. Nick Foles needed players around him. Someone like Todd Gurley needed players around him. And that the theme may be that the talent can be there and we don't have to write it off so quickly when they don't produce. Sometimes we have to look for behaviors that are independent of other players that they work with and see if those are a little bit more predictive of their potential for success. And I think Goff showed that as a rookie. We saw Todd Gurley show that even last year, but people were questioning whether or not he was good anymore. So I think what we saw was a season that for many people was upside down. But at the same time, it also emphasized how you look at the game. Kareem Hunt's another good example. He started great. His offensive line didn't play very well. He went through a huge stretch where that if you were fortunate enough to have a strong team to make it to the playoffs with him, maybe he helped you bring a title home. But many fantasy owners probably didn't make it because they had to lean on Hunt.
Right. I absolutely agree with all the things that you said, and really brings us back full circle on a lot of things that we have to keep telling ourselves, that we don't make a statement or some sort of belief and then keep on it. But things change even within a season. We have 16 game samples for a lot of the players, and then next year it's a whole different team, different pieces around a player, and it's that's what makes football fun in general. Football fun, and that definitely trickles into our preparations for Dynasty and for fantasy football. I think you put it in a fantastic way. So let's get on to this. Is a great segue to our topic for today. In your own words, what does it mean to have a process in dynasty football, and kind of discuss with the importance of having a process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, part of having a process, I think for me, obviously what I do with the rookie scouting portfolio is a process. And so when it comes to evaluating rookies, I created a process based on my past work, which was as an operations manager and a quality director for a company that had a large number of branches across the United States. And I was, paid to go learn some certification processes that were in place for managing operations like this and were based on world-class processes and world-class, kind of thinking in terms of best in class type of stuff. So, I thought it would be interesting to take some of those processes for monitoring behavior that's often seen as subjective, where they try to make it as objective as possible. And the way they do that is how they define the process, the criteria for the process of how you score things, what the scoring methods are, so that they reduce variation as much as possible while encouraging the people who are doing the actual evaluating to embrace a process that will help them learn how to do this work better. And part of that is when you start to see that things don't fit in your process, that your process has enough breathing room for you to actually revisit it and go, how do we redefine what we're looking at? How do we refine what we're doing so that it's that we're always making our definitions of the criteria we have better, And so that's how I've learned a lot about football, is having a process to actually study film and study players. And so through the mistakes I've made, through the successes I've had, and through observations I've had through in between, I've been able to refine a process enough that I've learned a lot about the game. Does it necessarily made me a better predictive, mind in terms of my evaluations? I don't know. I can't really tell you whether that's going to be the case or not, but I know that I've had my share of good successes. I've had my share of big failures. But at the same time, I think what people see is your frame of reference and understanding where you're coming from and the transparency of it. So when it comes to applying to a dynasty situation of doing that, there's obviously that for evaluating rookies, but for me also, it's about having a plan and understanding, what your league's scoring is, understanding, what your team's strengths and weaknesses are, and then looking at that and looking at how other competitors in your league, how they value players. Sometimes you go into new leagues and you take over a team and everyone hoards quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And that you may not be able to get you may think that it's more important to get a running back, but you may realize that you're not going to be able to get, or you may feel it's very important to get a quarterback, but no one's going to give you anybody but Alex Smith. And even then they're gonna inflate the price of somebody like Alex Smith. And last year he was great, fantasy wise, but for years, that if if the guy you're gonna roll with was Alex Smith, you were looking at your 15th, 16th, 17th ranked quarterback. And sometimes what you have to do is understand that environment and figure out how you're going to build. And sometimes that means instead of getting what you think you need right away, is stockpiling what is easy to get so that you can create value and then be able to either exchange on that value through trades. And usually that's what happens, and then or build it through the draft as well, and then just keep taking chances on other things. So for me, it's about that process is evaluating the league and the dynamics of the owners. And if you can start with that, then you can determine what how easy your needs are going to be met, and what you may have to do to acquire those needs.
Fantastic. That is a great way of putting it. I think there's a lot to be learned from your process. And one of the things that I hear is sometimes building a process, you do need experience. You do need to go through certain mistakes and successes to know if you're heading into the direction. So at this time, would you say you're very comfortable with how you approach any dynasty? You're put into a league, an orphan, or a startup. You can rely on this plan of yours, this process of yours?
Yeah, I can give you a great example. I'm in a league that I absolutely love. This will be my second year heading into this year. But this last year was my first year. The team, it's called the Graduate School League, and it's run by a guy named Jeremy Hyde, who is known as
Wow.
Frog in the Window in on Twitter. And
Yeah.
Jeremy has this unique league that it's a IDP Dynasty league, but it's got a different slant because the way it works, Chris, is that you can only keep players on your roster. Players only have a career life of 4 years.
Wow,
So
like The Graduate.
yeah, so they have only 4 years of career life, but you get to pick. You have a rookie draft, and then you have a development draft, but you can only pick college player, like one college player from, or I think it's one or two, one college player from each level of class. So you can only pick one freshman, one sophomore, one junior, one
Oh,
senior, and
wow.
then you
Okay.
hold on to them, and then you have these players. And so I inherited an 0 and 11. I inherited a team that didn't win a game, and and I wanted this team. I took it because it had Patrick Mahomes and Chad Kelly, who are two players that I really kind of enjoyed, and it didn't have any other quarterback. It didn't have a quarterback, but I liked that, and I thought, building this team as I started to look into it and learn the rules, and it was fairly complex. And I was just coming out of finishing the RSP, so I wasn't, I was asking Jeremy a lot of questions, but I knew that I didn't have a grasp of it. So year one, I just kind of looked at it as like, this is going to be the mistake year. I'm not going to sit here and try and make crazy trades or moves because I may not understand the system well enough. So this was kind of more sit back and see what I can do. And if there's something obvious, then it's time to do that. So, I was able to make an obvious trade and trade down with a first round pick. And knowing that I couldn't get a quarterback, I decided, well, the linebackers were very important. So let me trade down, and I got Miles Jack for a lower pick, and a lower pick in the first round and a second round pick. And with those 2 second round picks, I picked Cooper Kupp and Alvin Kamara. And
Nice.
so that worked out pretty well. And then in free agency, I saw that there were guys who were suspended who that might get back in or later, like after 4 weeks. One of them was David Irving, the defensive tackle who moved from defensive end. Well, you look at David Irving's game as a defensive end and what he did at the end of last year, and if they're going to put him as a tackle, as a penetrating rusher, you think, well, that could get me a lot of points, and it may and no one's going to take him right now because they don't want to wait 4 weeks, and they have tight rosters. I'll do it because I have nothing. I can't go any lower than not. So the long and the short of it is that I lost my first 5 games in that league. I didn't have a starting quarterback, which was one of the more valuable things. And then I reeled off 6 wins in a row because Kamara ended up becoming a big deal. David Irving became a big deal, and the Rams receivers started to play well. Were playing well, and other rookie picks that I picked worked out. And next thing I knew, I was 1 game out of first place without a starting quarterback, and people were trying to trade me Teddy Bridgewater because they were, trying to get some value for him and thinking I would need it. And I just decided no, because I didn't expect to do this well this year. But part of that is, again, it's evaluating what people are willing to give up. No one wanted to give up quarterbacks without me spending a lot of money. And I knew that I was going to get Patrick Mahomes next year at worst because most likely he'd get a chance to really play. And that's panned out so far. So I have inherited a team that I have, Alvin Kamara for another 3 years, Cooper Kupp for another 3 years, and I have Patrick Mahomes. And now it's a team that, and it's about not having a fixed mindset about what you're going to do, figuring out what the lay of the land is and going, that's how that's going to work. And we'll see. I mean, maybe I'll go 0-11 next year, but at least I feel like I'm in better shape than I was last year.
Absolutely. And I think a large part of that is thanks to you understanding what talents might be found later and what is more acquirable now. That really is sticking to a process without looking for the immediate results. And sometimes it just comes to you because you trusted your way of operating. And I think that's a fantastic example and something that I might borrow because I am in a league that is similar to that. We call it the collegiate, well, there's an S in front of it, collegiate football league. Same concept. We used players who are in their 1st through 4th year only. We can't We can't have anyone that's a veteran. So anyone in their rookie contract, and it just adds a whole different dynamic. It's fun. It might be something different for everyone, but it just gets you that mindset. You're thinking, oh, I only have this player for 4 years, so I'm not gonna have them for eternity. But it's fun. So that's another element of Dynasty that's always fun, is the different formats that you can have. But the thing remains, you're applying a plan, a concept, a process that will take you understanding what you need to look at first. You need to understand the scoring, you need to understand the dynamics, who the people are, like you mentioned.
Yeah, and there are times too, Chris, that if I were starting in a vacuum and we were starting, a brand new league, and you didn't have all these dynamics at play or knew what you didn't have any set things to understand from, and you were just starting from scratch, then yeah, for me, I have certain tendencies. I mean, for me, I believe that I like to look at what I call career windows for players, because you always hear the idea from the NFL that players have, the average NFL player, not starter or all-star, has about a 3-year career.
Yes.
So because of the injury rates, I look at that and thought, okay, let's measure players in career windows of 3 years. So if you're going to play Dynasty, let's have 3-year outlooks on every player that you're looking at. And that's about as long as you want to expect, because, we talk about drafting a running back and thinking and have this hope that he'll play 12 years and be good for at least 10 of them. And, that's great when that happens, but it doesn't happen an awful lot. But so I started looking at really good starters at each of those positions who are long-term starters, and determined that wide receivers have the longest. Wide receivers and great quarterbacks have the longest career windows. They tend to have somewhere between 4 and 5 3-year career windows when they're really at their best. And even when they're just decent, they tend to have, somewhere between 2 to 4, whereas running backs who are decent tend to have 1 to 2 at best.
Right.
So receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends tend to be longer than running backs. So the way I look at that is, receivers also tend to have more roster spots for starting lineup opportunities. So if I'm going to build a team, I'd rather build with great wide receivers who are established, even if they're mid-career, because they still have a longer, odds are more likely to have a longer period to produce. Same with tight ends and same with quarterbacks. So even with quarterbacks, I'll take quarterbacks who are in their 30s and feel like, it used to be 30. Oh, well, you shouldn't take a quarterback at 30. I still have a dynasty league where I have Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers, and I've been playing in it for 7 years. And I picked them, and people were telling me that I picked 2 old guys, and they're still on my team, and they've been stalwarts in terms of being able to at least keep things stable. And I think that for me, I look for anchors, and to me, the anchors in most leagues, if they're starting more receivers than running backs on a regular basis, and it's not so flexed out that it can be even, then it's receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks. I want a top tight end. I'd rather go into my league with running backs like Peyton Barber and Jalen Richard. I mean, I'm talking about extremes,
right.
But I'd rather go into it with that kind of extreme where I have, and I'm going to look at a couple of my leagues here, and it'll be a good example. There's a football guys league that I'm in with, that I am a commissioner with. That's a full IDP league with all the football guys writers, and we started this years ago. But my running backs are Amir Abdullah, Mike Davis, Dion Lewis, Bilal Powell, and Jamal Williams. That's not an inspiring group, but my quarterbacks are Tom Brady and Russell Wilson. My wide receivers are Des Bryant, Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, Josh Gordon, who I've just held on to, Tyreek Hill, and my bench players are folks like Robbie Anderson and Paul Richardson, and Josh Gordon. And then it's a 1.5 PPR league, so Rob Gronkowski and Travis Kelce are my tight ends, and I can start 2 tight ends. So, and this is full IDP too. So this team, while I have not won, we've played 3 years now, and I've been in the playoffs each year, and I've been one of the top 5 scoring teams, I have to play the likes of Sigmund Bloom or Aaron Rudnicki, and each of
Right.
those guys, each time they've beaten me, they've won the championship, and they've battled each other, or Jeff Hasley. And Jeff Hasley's in my division, and we often end up like having these high point scoring wars where, like, when you get into the playoffs, we just look at each other and go, well, good luck to you, because either one, we're both capable of having huge weeks, and who knows what's going to happen at that point. So, but it's about building the team that can get you into that position. And so when, for me, I look at these teams and, building it up to know that I'd rather take chances on running backs in the draft. I'd rather not trade for a player because they're not as important. It's not as important. While some folks try and load up on a certain position, and a lot of my teams are just based on wide receiver heavy. If I can get a couple of really strong quarterbacks, that's great. But I have teams like this as well, where my only quarterback, like last year, a team that I really messed up. Like I have a team that I had Peyton Manning and Gates and Marshawn Lynch and Von Miller, and I drafted all these guys. And then I just decided to experiment, because I like to experiment at this stage. And I tried to like time getting rid of these guys the way people said the time to get rid of them. And I just blew up my team unnecessarily. Like, I gave away Lynch before he had like his big Super Bowl season. I gave away Manning before he went to Denver. I gave away Von Miller. I had Patrick Willis, and he had his career ended. All those types of things. And so, for years I've had Russell Wilson as my quarterback, which is nice, but nobody else. And in this league, and it's been one of those teams where, like, literally, I finally rebuilt it. But when you look back again, let me see if I can find it here real quick. But this team finally made the playoffs after about 4 years of me being usually one game out. But it's like, this year I have Russell Wilson and Jared Goff, and I decided that I was just going to draft by talent instead of trying to get need, because I was tired of missing out on need, especially with some guys who blew up their teams and had, like, we have one guy in this league who literally had like every first round pick except for mine, and every second round pick except for mine, and almost half the third round picks. I don't know how he did that, but he did that. And, it's just crazy how people do that. And so, for me, I was like, I can't get any running. I'm not being able to get any running backs that are worthwhile, but I've built wide receivers. I had guys like T.Y. Hilton and Marvin Jones and Paul Richardson and Adam Thielen and Michael Thomas. And so I had a strong receiving core, and I had Kelsey again, so who I drafted. But I just decided I'm not getting running backs. I'm not being able to get there because I keep being in the middle of the pack. So I'm never able to be high enough to get a running back. And I'm not low enough to be a playoff team. So let me just start building on talent that I know I feel good about. So I picked Jared Goff a couple years ago. I picked up Patrick Mahomes. I picked Chad Kelly. I already had Russell Wilson. So knowing that these guys like to hoard quarterbacks, but they never like to draft them until a certain point. So you have those types of things. You just it's that whole idea of knowing your league and building a strategy based off it.
Absolutely. And those are fantastic. Your experiences resonate so well with some of my leagues that, I feel better now that knowing, someone that I look up to also had to go through some of those growing pains a lot. But also it's fun. It's fun as part of building a dynasty, and then going through, what is it that I should be looking at now that I know, this will not work because I didn't believe in my own process and things like that. And it's funny how it works. But yeah, speaking of picks and rookies, I think you've done a fantastic job in trying to look into what the next crop is and understanding what who are the upcoming ones. Does that kind of influence the way you set up the team right now, like knowing what's going to come up ahead?
For me, it's a little weird because, thankfully, You
Hmm.
know, I have a fair number of people in like kind of the dynasty communities that I play in who tend to buy my work. So that's great, but except for me drafting. So it's one of those things that, you know, I play in leagues with a lot of people who get my work, or they're just really excellent dynasty owners in their own right.
Hmm.
So it's tough. And so for me, I have to take more chances if I really like a rookie. Like where some people might look at something like the RSP where I take the ADP of a player and compare it to my rankings and give you a sweet spot value to where that's going to work. That's not going to work
Hmm.
for me in a lot of leagues I'm in because people know where I'm thinking about where that player is going to go. And if they like him more than me or
Hmm.
as much as I do, they're going to they're going to take him. So I find that a lot of times I have to be more risk friendly. And if I really
Hmm.
want a guy, that or I have to play, I either have to be very risk friendly or I just have to play the value and take what's there and try and maximize my value through trades and things like that. So oftentimes, what I'm trying to do, as you see, is when I build up players based on these anchors, it allows me to just target it gives me two choices. I either get to target one position and just really try and go heavily at that position in the draft,
Wow.
and hopefully that I hit off. That's why I'm trying to say, oh well, let me get myself set up so that in theory I can just take running backs, you
Right.
know, and that could be a way to do it. Or if that doesn't work out, I can say, well, if I can't get the running backs that I like that I want to stockpile, then
Mhm.
I'll just take the best talent available at the position that I'm already really strong at, so that then I can parlay that into a trade. Because say I had, guys like T.Y. Hilton, Martavis Bryant coming off a big year, Marvis Jones, or Michael Thomas coming off a big year, and then Marvin Jones plays well enough that I could probably trade T.Y. Hilton or Martavis Bryant if Martavis was better than how he was. But I can I can look at some of the depth I have now and say, all right, I've got enough depth that I can parlay that into something as a positive for me and get what I want, and maybe even get my pick of what I want, that's a proven commodity, as opposed to a rookie who I think's going to be good as a
Right.
talent, but I don't know how that's all going to match up with the team any better than anybody else, other than I can
Mhm.
make some educated guesses.
Yeah, that's important to look into how the picks we often evaluate in a vacuum without bouncing back. How does this fit in my team for the upcoming years? So, again, I love your work. I've always uh, get your RSP every year,
Thanks.
so no problem getting that this year. Think I already pre-ordered. We'll talk about that. And you've been generous with your time, so I'm trying to get through some of my last topic for you, my last question. We'll do a little bit of a ink blot test invented by a young Brad Pitt, according to my wife, anyways. Uh, Herman Rorschach, yeah, the picture just amazes me when you look into it. But the
maybe
idea,
maybe maybe Herman was a vampire, and maybe he was part, and maybe Brad was just playing, or Herman was playing Brad in that vampire movie.
oh my gosh, that would be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right.
But yeah, but for people who are more familiar with the name ink blot test, we usually present you with a um, very vague, open-ended type of picture, and I guess it helps you to apply what you see in that picture is something that has been sitting in your mind, but it just comes out right after you stare at it. So I'm going to apply the same kind of test in a fantasy sense. I'm going to throw to you some players that I find to have a very polarizing opinion of them, and this past week when I talked to people on my Twitter timeline, and I want you to kind of bring out your thinking, bring out your process. How do you view them? Do you buy, hold, sell? How do they fit to your team? My first one to you is Jordan Howard.
I would say that I would buy him. I think that he had a rough year this year because of injury,
Mm.
and it doesn't help that you have a rookie quarterback and a receiving core that's depleted. So
Mhm.
I look at him as the version of the 011 Dynasty team that has nowhere to go but up,
Mhm.
because I don't think the injury that he dealt with was one of those that it's going to be. a constant care type of situation. I think it was more of a, he hurt his shoulder
Hmm.
and he toughed it out. He'll have time to recover and heal. And he played he played it extremely well given the circumstances. And I think that he'll be in an offense that will be improved, and they'll be on the way up. Do I think that he's a must buy who's going to have a great year? No, not necessarily. But I think that given what he did last year when he was healthy and when they were able to feed him the ball, I think
Hmm.
that there's enough pieces in place in Chicago for him to be a more consistent contributor this year with more upside of, low running back one.
Fantastic, and you make a great point. It's a lot of changes, like we talked about, that changes that we need to pay attention to and can't um, expect the same role and or the same type of usage that he's going to see this year or this upcoming year. All right, my second player to you, Christian McCaffrey.
I'm still sold on Christian McCaffrey. I liked him last year.
Mhm.
I think that the more the more the season went on, the more he went to the coaches and said, "I can take on more. Give me more," and they gave him more. And while I know a lot of people don't view him as a running back,
Right.
you hear a lot of that from some analysts on Twitter. He's very much a running back. He just may not be your Jordan Howard type of running back.
Mhm.
And I think that this team will do more to get him ready. And you got to understand that Cam Newton with the injured shoulder last year wasn't fully healthy probably until, the first month and a half of the
Mhm.
season in
Right.
terms of being able to throw the ball at a great level, which means that he probably wasn't, he's probably a little more limited during the preseason.
Mm.
And some of the most difficult throws to make aren't intermediate and deep throws, but those short timing passes to running backs out of the backfield.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you'll ask quarterbacks about that, and they'll tell you that the touch and timing required to actually place that ball as well as it needs to be is deceptive. It's deceptive in how difficult it is. So I think that when you look at some of the throws that were made to McCaffrey earlier in the year, you can see some of that happening. And then also they were experimenting a little bit with McCaffrey to figure out, how do we use him here? Is this going to work? Are we going to, how do we disguise it so it's not so predictable and we don't do the same things all the time, or that it fits with what our offense is doing? So it was a feeling out process with a player this versatile. I mean, think about buying a tool at the hardware store that has a great deal of different uses, multiple uses. You're not going to go home in your shop unless you're a master craftsman and and who's used this tool a million times before and be able to use it all the ways that it's shown on the commercial that you can use it. You're probably going to mess up a few times, or you're probably going to only use it a few ways and then put it back in the box. And then 3 years later, you may get the opportunity to use it in that different way again. And even then, it's going to be you might be a little rusty with it. And I
Right.
think that when you have a player that versatile like Christian McCaffrey, you can't expect them to exploit it in all of those ways. Now, people say, well, they did with Alvin Kamara, and he's
Mhm.
but maybe that's because Sean Payton is a master craftsman. Drew Brees is a master craftsman, and the offensive line was fantastic. And I would argue that they didn't quite use him in all the ways that they could have. So it's still, some of the differences is surrounding talent, that talent being healthy, and
Mhm.
an offense that it tends to be a little bit that is still kind of growing into itself and had lost key personnel. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, I thought McCaffrey played very well. I
Mhm.
just thought that his team wasn't exactly giving him the type of support that could maximize his value. And I think that there's still growing room.
Right. And I agree a lot with what you said. And I think the glimpse that we saw, and even in the playoff games, in his last playoff game, you see what he could be from game to game starting in 2018. And the concerns were legitimate, I guess, coming into the season about how the Panthers were going to use him, and it showed up. But I think one of the things I learned best about what you just said was the shorter throws are much more difficult than they appear. I guess that'll change the way I view quarterback passes going from now on. That's fantastic. So my last player to you, our last ink blot, is Ezekiel Elliott.
I think that I would definitely buy Ezekiel Elliott. I think that the hard part with Elliott is more off the field than it is on the field. And
Correct.
so, that gets into an area that's very difficult for a lot of people because we certainly want to armchair psychoanalyze what's going on with the player. And so, the way I look at it is, have I been told by people I know who know someone secondhand who knows him, that they said that he's someone heading into last year who has this kind of attitude that I'm great. Not only am I great, but I'm a star and nothing's going to hurt me. I'm
Mm,
young and invulnerable kind of behavior about the world around him. And that things that can happen to anyone who encounters fame. I find fame one of the more fascinating subjects because I think it's very scary.
mm,
And I think that fame is, I heard a writer who I think the book was called Eat, Pray, Love. I never read it, but I know
mm,
that it was a very popular book several years ago. And the author was on a TED Talks discussing her life because she was, when she wrote this book, she was basically working a menial job and struggling author, and
mm,
it got big, and then there was a follow-up book, and when she wrote the follow-up, it was not nearly as well received, and it was panned and it both publicly and in her industry circles. And then she got through that and then wrote something else, and it turned out to be very good, and she was very proud of the work, and it kind of stabilized her career. But she talked about fame, and she said that fame is like someone taking your being, what you've grown up to be, everything, all your experiences that have made you you, and taken you and flung you as far away from where you were as possible. and
mm,
and the process of fame is basically, to get that balance again, is that you have to work your way back to that center point of where you were. But at first it's heady because
mm.
it's like being transported in a rocket ship,
Yeah.
and it's thrilling, and it can be spectacular, but it can also at the same time be unbelievably scary.
Mm,
To hear you, the way you describe me makes me laugh, and it's flattering, but it makes me laugh because it's like, I'm just some dude who goes to the local Italian deli down the street from where I live and gets lunch on, a few times a week. And, very rarely does anybody talk, if somebody said, "What do you do?" I'd say, "I'm a writer. I write about fantasy football," or "I'm a writer. I scout football players." They go, "Oh, that's interesting." And, and we talk about it whenever they wouldn't know me from Adam. But every once in a while, you go somewhere, and if the people who do know you because of that niche, when they respond, I mean, like my wife and I went somewhere, and after a show on at Football Guys, our Audible show, and went somewhere to breakfast, and these two young guys were looking at us, kind of weird, like just kept looking at us, and we didn't really know what that was about, and I was wondering what was going on, and then they came up to us, and it was like, "Are you Matt Waldman?" And then they started kind of gushing in a way that, like, I really never had experienced like that, and it was odd. And on the one hand, my wife was very proud of that, and it was kind of
mm,
fun to see, but it was also kind of weird because you don't expect people to recognize you on a daily level because you don't experience that, and to have people do it in a way where they're like nervous, and
mm.
they're like, and you're just thinking, I'm just, you're just you don't think people are, you don't think of yourself in that way. But I
Right.
can imagine that people at first, they all experience that. But if I were to experience that every day everywhere I went, it would probably both be thrilling and scary. And
Yeah.
the thrilling would be if you got that kind of attention and you didn't have your real sense of self, and especially when you're younger, and your
Mhm,
ego might be a little bit more fragile, or might be a little not as embedded in who you really are and your direction. So any kind of attention from someone who might be, you find attractive that you would have talked to before, or someone who has some sort of power or is well known because of, you know, in their business capacity, who would have paid attention to you otherwise, is like gushing about the things that you do, it would make you start to feel maybe an outsized level of importance. And I think that you look at someone like Ezekiel Elliott, and I think that's happened to him from high school to Ohio State to here. And there are a lot of people that say he doesn't get that this can all go away so quickly. And so a lot of his behaviors are like very immature behaviors, and you know, and then some of the things you could describe as if they're actually the case, which nothing's been charged, criminal behaviors. You know, so you look at those things, and I can understand any dynasty owner who looks at that and says he's trouble, and if you're playing the odds, then you say, yeah, I'm going to stay away from Ezekiel Elliott, and he's not going to learn. But I would probably, I'm more of an open-minded person and think that people grow and people change, and that a lot of people who come from a certain environment get thrusted into this environment, which is totally alien for just about anybody, but probably a child star, you know, or a child star who was the child of megastars. You know, I'm sure Will and Jada Smith's kids probably have a little bit better comfort level of this kind of thing than, you know, somebody whose mom worked at a mall and they became famous, you know. So, you know, when you look at that, I just think that he has room to grow, and he's an immense talent. He's a Hall of Fame caliber talent. And he has the opportunity to really build on that behind a very good offensive line and a good young quarterback and a fairly stable team. So I'd still buy him because his upside is too good to just avoid him.
Great. That is fantastic, the way you touched on this situation, not just from a fantasy lens, but all from a more global kind of taking a step back. What this goes on in a mind of a younger 20-year-old. And I can see that, how that plays out to you because you've taken chances. Like I heard, you took chances on Martavis Bryant, you took chances on Josh Gordon. They're all on your team. So Ezekiel Elliott would sort of have that kind of the confidence that you have in him.
Yeah, and you have to know yourself. You have to know yourself. If you're you have to know what you're going to regret. Are you going to regret more that you picked someone who you had a feeling might have a big risk and they failed, and you feel worse about that you picked him because he failed? Or do you feel worse that you didn't pick him and he succeeded?
Right.
And I think for me, I just believe I'd rather believe in the positive of people growing. And unless there's like major proof that this is someone who really has not gotten their life together, and over again, there are certain things that just don't make any sense to do it, then yeah, I'm not going to do it. And it doesn't mean that I would take Ezekiel Elliott every time, or that I'd trade away 3 first-round picks to get him. But if the deal's right, yeah, I'll take a chance on him.
Sure, absolutely. Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous with your evening with us. It's a Thursday night, a school night for some of us. I'd like to give you this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about what you're looking forward to doing this off season.
Sure. I mean, right now I'm finishing up my film study for the month to start writing the 2018 rookie scouting portfolio, which I make available every April 1st since 2006. And so I'm really just enjoying the process of watching film right now. I'm having a lot of fun with that. And, this is a very interesting quarterback class that has some top talents in it. But they're not, the quarterback development situation in the NFL and the way that teams look at quarterbacks and look at offenses is still changing. And there's a lot of old guard behavior and a lot of new school stuff. So fit's going to be very important there. This running back class may be even deeper than last year. And last year was the best one I saw since 2007 with, Forte, Jamal Charles, Chris Johnson, McFadden, Felix Jones, all those guys, Rashard Mendenhall. So,
gosh, wow.
So, You think about all those guys, and now you look at this one and you go, this class could be as even deeper than last year's that compared well to that 2007 group. Wide receivers, I don't know. I don't think is quite as strong as we've seen in recent classes. And then tight ends is pretty interesting. But the running back and quarterback class is very fascinating. So I'm looking forward to being able to like finish up, tape study with these guys and just and just see how these guys develop. Right now, I'm probably my biggest joy about fantasy football may even not even be fantasy football. It's just watching how these players develop based on studying them. I've just become a big fan of the league. I'm wearing a Rams hat. I'm not a Rams fan, really. I'm a fan of like what they're doing and some of their players. But I'm just starting to collect hats now at this point, just because I just like seeing how these teams develop and shape.
That's fantastic. I think that is something that I've kind of sensed, that the more you work on this RSP, that you've grown fonder of watching them unfold, watching how your players, how the players grow, or what kind of role they grow into. And I think you named it appropriately. It's a portfolio. It's not something that's static. It's not a resume. It's something that will keep growing. This is where they are at this point, but we're looking forward to some of the places that they can grow once they hit the professional level.
Well, here's to happy accidents, that's for sure. Because I'm glad that that makes sense. I never thought of it that way, but that's a happy accident of good forethought. I guess in that manner.
All right. So tell our listeners or viewers how they can find your work.
Sure. You can find me at www.mattwaldmanrsp.com, and that's where you'll be able to get the RSP. You'll also be able to see free content that gives you a lot of film room study that I do on YouTube, and you can go to the RSP Film Room on YouTube and subscribe to that channel. And I have videos that last anywhere between 3 minutes to 30 minutes in length that break down players in depth. And I've done probably close to 250 of them, some of them with guests ranging from Lance Zierlein to Sigmund Bloom to former players and current players. Jamal Williams was a guest of one of my film rooms last year. His trainer came to me during the Senior Bowl and saw one of my boiler room videos, which are my shorter version videos, and wanted to talk with me about Jamal. And I asked if he would come on, and he agreed to doing that. So we watched his Michigan State game last year. We spent an hour on a hangout just like this, doing that. So you can find that there at the RSP Film Room. And then I'm at Matt Waldman on Twitter. I show videos there. And then I do Football Guys, obviously a great site. I do something called the Top 10. And every week that I take a look at the NFL game, and I put up 10 videos with commentary about what I see about during the week that I think has a fantasy implication. Either I think this is a player on the rise, this player played better than his stats showed. These are players that aren't playing so well, and here's why I think that is, and giving you some sort of fantasy scope towards that. And you can find even a library of all those videos on Instagram at Matt Waldman RSP.
Wow, you do Instagram too. That's great. Well, again, thank you, Matt. You are a friend of our fakepigskin.com, and I truly enjoy your work. Thank you for hanging out with me tonight and presenting us your Dynasty Mind.
Chris, thank you very much.